The house stood at the edge of town like a relic from a forgotten time. Its paint had long faded into a dull gray. The windows were cracked, and the roof sagged in places like an old man's shoulders. People who passed it on their way into Willow Creek often slowed down, stared, then chuckled to themselves. It was known as the Crumbling Mansion, though in truth it was hardly a mansion anymore. Years of neglect had stolen its grandeur. Vines crept up its sides, shutters hung on by a single rusted hinge, and the porch groaned under the weight of even the smallest step. When Daniel Mercer returned to town and bought the property, everyone thought he'd lost his mind. Daniel had been a soldier for most of his adult life. He'd served 3 tours overseas, each one leaving marks both visible and hidden. His body bore scars, but it was the quiet in his eyes, the way he seemed to weigh every word that told the deeper story. After leaving the army, he didn't come back to Willow Creek to be celebrated. He came back because it was the only place that still felt familiar. He'd grown up here, running through its fields and fishing in its river. The townsfolk remembered him as Danny, the polite boy who helped his mother carry groceries and mowed lawns for a few extra dollars. But that was before the war. Now, Danny was gone, replaced by a man who kept his back to the wall in any room and scanned every street corner like it might hide danger. So when word spread that Daniel had bought the old Whitmore place, the Crumbling Mansion, the reaction was predictable. "Why would anyone spend money on that heap?" laughed Carl Jennings, who ran the local hardware store. "He must have been hit in the head one too many times," another muttered over coffee at the diner. "It's a waste," declared Mrs. Henderson, who had lived in Willow Creek for over 70 years. "That place should be torn down. Even Daniel's old high school." Friends, those who were willing to say hello, looked at him strangely when they heard, but Daniel didn't seem to care. He signed the papers, collected the heavy iron key from the real estate office, and drove out to the mansion on a foggy morning in early September. The gravel driveway crunched beneath the tires of his old pickup as he parked in front. He got out, slung his worn backpack over his shoulder, and stared at the house for a long time too. Most people, it was ugly, decaying, useless. To him, it was a challenge and maybe, just maybe, a place to start over. The inside was worse than he expected. Dust blanketed every surface. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like lace curtains, and the air smelled faintly of mold. Floorboards squeaked and popped under his boots, and in some places, the wood felt dangerously soft. The living room still had a massive fireplace, its bricks blackened from long-forgotten winters. The staircase that curved upward was missing several steps. In the dining room, a once beautiful chandelier hung crooked, its crystals dull. Daniel dropped his bag on the floor and got to work. For weeks, his days were the same, sunrise to sunset. He repaired what he could, hauling rotten boards out to a growing pile in the yard. He patched holes in the roof, replaced shattered windows, and reinforced the porch so it could hold weight again, and every time someone passed by on the road, he could feel their eyes on him. Sometimes they slowed down to watch. Other times he caught them shaking their heads, or even smirking. It didn't bother him not much. He faced worse things than small-town gossip. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was holding on to a secret. It started with a draft. On a cold evening, while hammering new boards into the hallway wall, Daniel noticed a thin stream of air brushing against his ankle. He frowned and knelt down. The draft was coming from beneath the floorboards, not the windows or door. That night, he sat in the living room, turning the old property records over in his hands. He'd requested them from the county office, curious about the house's history. The Whitmore family had built it in 1892, almost a century and a half ago. The last Whitmore heir had left in the 1960s, and since then, it had passed through several owners, each staying only a few years before selling. No mention of a basement, but the draft suggested otherwise. The next morning, Daniel began a careful search. He tapped on walls, listening for hollow echoes. He pulled up loose boards in the hallway, inspecting the dark space beneath. Then, in the corner of the dining room, he found something odd, a narrow seam in the wall, almost invisible under layers of wallpaper. He ran his fingers along it. The wallpaper was brittle, peeling away easily. Beneath it was an old wooden panel. When he pushed on it, it shifted slightly, as if on hidden hinges. Heart pounding, he pressed harder. The panel swung inward with a low groan, revealing a small, steep staircase disappearing into darkness. So there was a basement. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and descended. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell changed musty, but also faintly metallic. At the bottom, his light fell on stone walls, thick and damp. The basement was larger than he'd imagined, stretching beneath most of the house, and it wasn't empty. Against the far wall stood an old wooden workbench, cluttered, with tools, rusted saws, hammers, and chisels, all neatly arranged. Beside it were several wooden crates, their lids nailed shut. Daniel pried one open with the claw of his hammer. Inside, wrapped in yellowed newspaper, was silverware, dozens of ornate forks, spoons, and knives, their handles engraved with intricate designs. He opened another crate, candlesticks, goblets, and trays, all silver, all tarnished but valuable. His breath caught. This wasn't just forgotten junk. This was wealth, but there was more. At the far end of the basement, hidden in a shadowed alcove, was a heavy iron door. Its surface was speckled with rust, and a massive padlock hung from the latch. Daniel stepped closer. The lock looked old, but it wasn't beyond breaking. He fetched a crowbar from upstairs and worked at it until the metal gave way with a sharp snap. The hinges screamed in protest as the door swung open. Inside was a smaller chamber, its walls lined with shelves. And on those shelves were rows upon rows of glass jars, each filled with coins. Some were copper pennies, others were silver dollars, and a few were real gold. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the glittering hoard. Whoever had owned this house before had been hiding a fortune beneath it. Over the next few days, Daniel inventoried everything. There were over 100 silver pieces, cups, plates, trays, and nearly 50 jars of coins. Mixed in with them were several small, velvet-lined boxes containing rings, brooches, and pocket watches. He researched the Whitmore family more deeply. It turned out they had been one of the wealthiest families in the county during the early 1900s, known for their shipping business and mining interests. But during the Great Depression, their fortune had supposedly vanished. Newspapers from the time hinted at rumors that they'd hidden valuables to keep them from being seized by banks. No one had ever found them, till now. Daniel didn't tell the town at first. He quietly contacted an antiques appraiser from the city, who confirmed the value of what he'd found it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Enough to restore the mansion completely, maybe even more. Word eventually leaked out. Someone saw the appraiser's van parked outside, and gossip spread like wildfire. "Did you hear?" People whispered at the diner. "They say Danny found gold in that old dump. No wonder he bought it." At first, the laughter stopped. Then, it turned into something else. Curiosity, envy, even admiration. People who had once mocked him now found excuses to stop by, offering help, advice, or just a friendly chat. Daniel accepted their kindness politely, but kept his guard up. Months passed. With the money from selling a small portion of the silver, he repaired the roof, rebuilt the staircase, and restored the grand fireplace. He replaced the windows with replicas of the originals, polished the chandelier until it sparkled, and sanded the floors until they shone the crumbling mansion. Slowly transformed back into the stately home it had once been. On a warm spring afternoon, the townspeople gathered for a barbecue on the lawn. It was Daniel's idea way to share the restored house with those who had doubted him. Not to boast, but to prove that even the most forgotten places could be brought back to life, as children played on the grass. And neighbors admired the polished woodwork inside. Daniel stood on the porch, sipping iced tea. Carl Jennings, the hardware store owner who had laughed the loudest, walked up and clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, Danny," he said with a sheepish grin, "guess I was wrong about you. That's one hell of a house now." Daniel smiled faintly. "It was always a good house," he said. Just needed someone to see it. Years later, the story of the soldier and the crumbling mansion became a local legend. Visitors to Willow Creek still drove past the restored Whitmore house, marveling at its beauty, never guessing that beneath it lay the hidden basement where Daniel Mercer had found not just treasure, but a place to belong again. And whenever people laughed at something broken or forgotten, someone in town would say, "Careful now. Remember the soldier's mansion. You never know what's behind the basement door." If you want, I can expand this further with more scenes, Daniel's military flashbacks, or townsfolk interactions, and detailed restoration steps so it's closer to 4,000 plus words while keeping the third-person cinematic style. That would make it even richer and deeper. Would you like me to do that?